The HMS Prometheus hung in high orbit above Europa, its obsidian hull absorbing what little sunlight reached this far from the sun. At 2 kilometers long, the vessel dwarfed the support ships that surrounded it, yet somehow managed to look delicate, almost fragile, with its elongated profile and crystalline arrays that spiraled along its length. Captain Sarah Chen stood at the command center's main viewport, her reflection ghosting against the reinforced transparent aluminum. Behind her, the bridge crew worked in focused silence, only the soft murmur of status updates and the gentle hum of equipment breaking the tension. They all knew what was coming. The Coraxian fleet would arrive within 12 hours. And with them, humanity's last chance at survival. Engineering reports quantum lance calibration at 98%, Captain. Lieutenant Rivera announced from his station. Dr. Wells says they'll have it at full capacity within the hour. Sarah nodded without turning. Tell them they have 30 minutes. The Coraxians are pushing their drives hard. They'll be here sooner than projected. The intelligence feeds had been clear. 300 Coraxian dreadnoughts, accompanied by over 1,000 support vessels. The largest invasion fleet ever assembled in known space, all heading for Sol with a single purpose, to end humanity's resistance once and for all. Against that, Earth could muster barely 50 capital ships and their escorts. The math was simple and brutal. Unless the Prometheus worked. Message from Fleet Admiral Harrison. Captain. Communications Officer Park called out. Priority 1. Sarah finally turned from the viewport, her dark eyes fixing on the main holographic display as it shimmed to life. The Admiral's weathered face appeared, looking even more haggard than during their last communication 3 days ago. Captain Chin. Harrison's voice was grave. Our long-range sensors confirm the Coraxian fleet has accelerated beyond our initial estimates. They'll reach Jupiter's orbit in 9 hours. Are you prepared? The Prometheus will be ready, sir, Sarah replied, keeping her voice steady despite the cold knot forming in her stomach. Though I must again recommend we attempt to engage them at Saturn's orbit. The civilian evacuation from Europa Station isn't complete. Request denied, Captain. Harrison's interruption was firm but not unkind. We need the gravitational lens effect from Jupiter to maximize the quantum lance's effectiveness. This is the only shot we're going to get, literally and figuratively. If this fails, humanity will need those evacuation ships for Earth itself. Sarah's jaw tightened, but she nodded. Understood, Admiral. We'll be in position. After Harrison's image faded, Sarah turned to her XO, Commander David Okonjo. Status of the evacuation. David consulted his tablet. 67% of civilians have been loaded onto transports. At current rates, we'll need another 14 hours for a complete evacuation. Which we don't have. Sarah finished. She'd known this was coming, had run the calculations herself a dozen times, but having it confirmed still felt like a physical blow. Prioritize children and medical cases. Anyone we can't evacuate will need to shelter in the deep bunkers. Captain, Rivera called out, his voice tense. We're picking up quantum wake signatures at the edge of our sensor range. Small ships, moving fast. Coraxian scout class. Sarah's posture straightened. They're pushing their advance elements ahead of the main fleet, trying to get eyes on our defenses. She keyed the ship-wide comm. All hands. This is the captain. Begin Operation Looking Glass. I repeat, begin Operation Looking Glass. Throughout the massive ship, crews sprang into action. The Prometheus's outer hull, already dark, seemed to drink in what little light touched it until the ship was nearly invisible to the naked eye. Sensor baffles came online, and energy signatures were masked or redirected. Within minutes, the pride of humanity's fleet had virtually disappeared. ECM reports full coverage, Captain, Rivera reported. We're running ghost. Sarah allowed herself a small smile. The Coraxians were in for several surprises today. Their arrogance, their absolute certainty in their technological superiority, had led them to dismiss humanity as primitive. They'd never bothered to truly understand their enemy, never imagined that desperation might drive innovation beyond their comprehension. The quantum lance was proof of that. The weapon had seemed impossible when Dr. Wells first proposed it, a way to weaponize quantum entanglement itself, creating a beam that could bypass any known shielding by attacking matter at its most fundamental level. The energy requirements were astronomical, the engineering challenges nearly insurmountable, but faced with extinction, humanity had found a way. "Message from Europa Station," Park announced. "They're sealing the deep bunkers. Evacuation is now at 71%. Sarah checked the chronometer. 8 hours and 43 minutes until the main correction fleet arrived. Not enough time to save everyone, but enough time to give humanity a fighting chance. She thought of the civilians who would be trapped in those bunkers, their lives depending on what happened in the next few hours. "Commander Okonjo, begin moving us into position behind Io," she ordered. "Nice and slow. Let's not give our scouts anything to see." She turned to her weapons officer, Lieutenant Commander Helen Walsh. "Helen, I want a full diagnostic on the quantum lance. If there's even a microscopic flaw in the alignment, I want to know about it now." "Aye, Captain," Walsh replied, her fingers already dancing across her console. Running full spectrum analysis. The bridge fell into focused silence as the massive ship began its careful maneuver. Sarah returned to the viewport, watching as Jupiter's angry red storm slowly came into view. The gas giant would be both their shield and their weapon. Its massive gravitational field would help focus the quantum lance, theoretically multiplying its already devastating power. Theoretically. Everything about this mission rode on theories and calculations and desperate hope. They had never actually fired the quantum lance at full power, couldn't risk the energy signature being detected during testing. The first real test would be against the Coraxian fleet. "Captain," Rivera's voice was urgent. "The scout ships are beginning active scans of the Europa defense perimeter." "Let them look," Sarah replied calmly. "They'll see exactly what we want them to see, a desperate collection of ships trying to evacuate civilians. Nothing that would suggest we have any real defense planned." The hours crept by with agonizing slowness. Sarah used the time to review the quantum lance firing sequences again, though she had long since memorized every detail. The weapon would have exactly one shot. The energy discharge would burn out most of its critical components, even if everything went perfectly. They would quite literally get one chance to save humanity. "Main fleet detected," Rivera announced grimly. "They're decelerating faster than we predicted. 8 minutes to Jupiter orbit." Sarah nodded. "Send the signal to the defense fleet. Tell them to begin their withdrawal to the fallback positions." She keyed her comm. "Engineering, status of the quantum lance." "Ready as it'll ever be, Captain." Dr. Wells' voice came back, tense but confident. "All systems are nominal. We've done everything we can." "Very well." Sarah took a deep breath, then addressed her bridge crew. "This is the moment everything has been leading to. Every simulation, every drill, every sacrifice has been for what we do in the next few minutes. Humanity is counting on us. Let's not let them down." The massive Coraxian fleet was visible now, their ships emerging from quantum space in a carefully choreographed dance. Their formation was perfect, presenting an overwhelming show of force. Sarah watched as their advance elements began to move toward Europa, no doubt expecting to find a token resistance before their inevitable victory. "They're launching fighters," Rivera reported. "First wave of the invasion force is forming up. Hold position," Sarah ordered. "Let them commit fully to the attack." She watched as more and more Coraxian ships moved into optimal position, their confidence in their superiority leading them to cluster tightly together for maximum tactical coordination. It was exactly what the humans had hoped for. "Quantum lance is hot," Walsh reported. "Ready to fire on your command." Sarah's hand tightened on the rail of her command station. Everything came down to timing now. Too early, and they'd missed their best chance. Too late, and the Coraxians would detect them and scatter their formation. "Target their flagship," she ordered. center of their command and control structure. The massive weapon hummed to life, power flowing from the ship's quantum reactors into the crystalline arrays that ran the length of the hull. Energy readings climbed rapidly toward levels that had previously only existed in theoretical physics. Target locked, Walsh confirmed. Gravitational lensing is at optimal focus. Sarah watched as the Coraxian fleet moved into their final attack position. In her mind, she said a silent prayer for the civilians still trapped on Europa, for her crew, for all of humanity. Fire. The quantum lance fired. For a fraction of a second, nothing seemed to happen. Then space itself appeared to bend between the Prometheus and the Coraxian fleet. A beam of impossible brightness lanced out, its color somehow both blindingly white and darker than the void simultaneously. The energy release was so massive that the Prometheus's inertial dampeners struggled to compensate, causing the massive ship to shudder. But Sarah Chen's eyes weren't on the weapon's discharge. She was watching the Coraxian fleet, remembering the day 3 years ago when this all began, when she'd first learned the true price of humanity's greatest innovation. Absolutely not, Dr. Emily Wells had said, her hologram flickering slightly in the secure conference room deep beneath Geneva. The quantum lance isn't ready for deployment. We haven't even completed the basic safety protocols. Sarah, then a commander, had watched the assembled military and civilian leadership shift uncomfortably in their seats. Admiral Harrison, already showing the stress that would age him so dramatically in the coming years, leaned forward. Doctor, the Coraxians have already taken 3 outer colonies. Their main fleet will reach Sol within 36 months. How long until the weapon is ready? You don't understand, Emily had insisted, running a hand through her prematurely graying hair. The quantum lance doesn't just destroy matter. It fundamentally alters the quantum state of spacetime in the target area. The cascading effects could be catastrophic. We need at least 5 more years of testing. We don't have 5 years, General Santos had countered, his weathered face grim. We barely have 3. Every simulation shows the same result. When their main fleet arrives, we lose. Period. Sarah had studied the technical readouts floating in the air before her. The quantum lense's theoretical capabilities were staggering, but so were the risks. What about a scaled-down version? She'd suggested, something we could test safely. Emily had shaken her head. The energies involved don't scale down. It's like trying to create a small supernova. The quantum entanglement effect either works at full power or it doesn't work at all. Then we have no choice, Harrison had said quietly. We build it, full scale, and we pray we get it right the first time. Back in the present, Sarah watched as the quantum lance's beam reached the Coraxian fleet. The massive flagship, a vessel 17 kilometers long that had destroyed dozens of human worlds, seemed to shimmer for a moment. Then reality itself appeared to crack around it. Energy cascade beginning. Walsh reported, her voice tight with tension. Quantum field collapse spreading through their formation. On the main display, Sarah watched as ships began to break apart, not exploding, but simply coming apart at the atomic level as fundamental forces stopped behaving normally. The effect spread like ripples in a pond, each wave of destruction triggering new cascades. Their fleet formation is breaking, Rivera announced. They're trying to quantum jump out, but the spatial distortions are preventing transit. Sarah felt no satisfaction as she watched the destruction unfold. The Coraxians had started this war, had driven humanity to this desperate measure, but the scale of death they were witnessing was sobering. Sensors showed over 1 million life signs vanishing as ships were torn apart by forces they couldn't even comprehend. She remembered another conversation, just 6 months ago, when they'd chosen her to command the Prometheus. Your service record is exemplary, Harrison had told her in his office on Luna Base. But this mission, it's different. We're not just asking you to risk your life or your ship. We're asking you to carry the weight of a decision that will echo through history. Sarah had met his gaze steadily. The Coraxians made their choice when they attacked our colonies. when they ignored our attempts at peace. Did they? Harrison had asked quietly. Or did their leaders make that choice for them? The quantum lance won't discriminate between soldiers and engineers, between warriors and medical staff. Everyone in that fleet will die. With respect, Admiral, everyone on Earth will die if we don't stop them. Sometimes there are no good choices, only necessary ones. Quantum cascade is beginning to stabilize, Walsh reported, bringing Sarah back to the present. 87% of their fleet has been neutralized. The remaining Coraxian ships were in chaos, their perfect formation shattered. Some were still trying to flee, others were launching desperate attacks in all directions. But the heart of their fleet, their command and control structure, was simply gone, reduced to component atoms by forces that defied conventional physics. Incoming transmission, Park announced, surprise evident in his voice. It's from one of the surviving Coraxian ships. They're requesting terms of surrender. Sarah closed her eyes briefly. This was the moment they had hoped for, but hadn't dared count on. Put them through to my ready room, she ordered, and get me a secure line to Admiral Harrison. As she moved to leave the bridge, she paused by Walsh's station. Begin power down sequence for the quantum lance. Then wipe all targeting data and engage the self-destruct for the primary focusing arrays. Captain. Walsh looked up in surprise. Those were our orders from the beginning. Sarah said quietly, this weapon can never be used again. The price is too high. She entered her ready room and took a moment to compose herself before accepting the transmissions. Humanity had survived, but their victory had come at a terrible cost, not just in lives lost, but in being forced to create something that should never have existed. The quantum lance had saved humanity, but Sarah knew the real work was just beginning. They would have to find a way to build peace with the surviving corrections, to ensure that such weapons would never be needed again, and they would have to live with the knowledge of what they had been capable of when pushed to the brink. As she prepared to begin negotiations, Sarah thought of Dr. Wells' words from years ago. The quantum lance hadn't just destroyed matter, it had fundamentally altered things. And not just in physical space. Humanity would never be quite the same after this day. They had looked into the abyss of their own potential for destruction, and that knowledge would stay with them forever. The question now was, what would they do with that knowledge? Display feed from observation post-Delta, Sarah ordered, studying the main screen as it filled with a real-time view of the devastation. 6 hours had passed since the quantum lance's deployment, and the scale of its effects was still becoming clear. Jupiter's orbital space had become a graveyard, where once the mighty Coraxian fleet had stood ready to destroy humanity. Now drifted a cloud of molecular debris that sparkled eerily in the gas giant's reflected light. The few surviving Coraxian vessels, 47 in total, remained in their surrender positions, surrounded by human ships that seemed almost tiny in comparison. Latest analysis from the science team, Captain, Commander Okonjo reported, his voice subdued. The quantum disruption field is still expanding, but at a decreasing rate. They estimate it will stabilize within the next 12 hours. Sarah nodded, remembering Dr. Wells' warnings about cascading effects. The weapon hadn't just destroyed ships. It had created a zone of altered space, nearly 100,000 kilometers across, where the basic laws of physics behaved differently. Already, research vessels were gathering at a safe distance, their sensors drinking in data about phenomena that had previously existed only in theoretical physics papers. Status of the surrender proceedings, she asked, though she already knew the answer. She'd spent the last 6 hours in negotiations, facing the shell-shock survivors of an empire that had never known defeat. The last Coraxian captain signed the terms 20 minutes ago, David replied. They're asking permission to recover their dead, where possible. Sarah closed her eyes briefly. The Coraxians, they had learned, believed that a warrior's essence lived in their body's remains. Without proper funeral rites, they thought their fallen would wander the void forever. But in this case, inform them that recovery is impossible, she said quietly. The quantum cascade didn't just destroy their ships, it broke down matter at the subatomic level. There's nothing left to recover. The bridge fell silent as the implications sank in. They had not just killed their enemy, they had denied them their afterlife according to their beliefs. It was one more weight to add to the already heavy burden of the day's actions. Message from Admiral Harrison. Communications Officer Park announced. Priority 1. The Admiral's face appeared on the main screen, looking simultaneously exhausted and energized. Captain Chen. The Defense Council has reviewed your after-action report. The Corexian surrender has been formally accepted by Earth's unified government. Understanding the terms, sir. Yes. Harrison's expression was grim. Their remaining ships will be escorted to Earth for internment. Their crews will be treated according to the Galactic conventions. And in exchange, we destroy all research related to the quantum lance. Sarah finished. It had been her suggestion during the negotiations, a way to prevent this weapon from ever being used again. Correct. Dr. Wells has already begun the process. All data, prototypes, and research materials are being systematically destroyed. The Prometheus will be decommissioned and scuttled, Sarah said firmly. The quantum lance components have already been rendered inoperable. Harrison nodded approvingly. There's something else. We're picking up massive quantum communications traffic from Corexian space. Word of what happened here is spreading. The weapon's effects were visible from several light years away. Every spacefaring race in this arm of the galaxy saw what we did. Sarah had expected this. The quantum lance's discharge had created effects that violated what most species considered possible. The message was clear. Humanity, when pushed to the brink, was capable of reshaping reality itself. The Corexian High Command has sued for peace, Harrison continued. Not just a surrender of their invasion fleet. They're asking for a complete cessation of hostilities. Their entire empire is standing down. They're afraid, Sarah said quietly. They think we have more weapons like this. Yes, and that fear is spreading. We're receiving communications from dozens of species, some we've never even contacted before. They all want to talk, to negotiate, to ensure we have no reason to turn such weapons on them. Sarah moved to the viewport, studying the still-expanding quantum disruption field. They don't understand, do they? We didn't build the quantum lance because we wanted to. We built it because they left us no choice. Perhaps that's the greatest deterrent of all, Harrison replied. Not just that we could build such a weapon, but that we did so only as a last resort. It sends a message. Don't push humanity into a corner, because we'll do whatever it takes to survive. A new alert flashed on the tactical display. Sir, Rivera called out, we're detecting quantum wake signatures at the edge of the system. Non-Corexian vessels. Looks like diplomatic ships. Dozens of them. And so it begins, Harrison said. The galaxy just changed, Captain. The balance of power, the assumptions about technological superiority, the understanding of what's possible. It's all different now. And humanity is at the center of that change. Sarah thought about the civilians on Europa, still emerging from their bunkers. About the colonies that would now be safe. About the price they had paid for that safety, not just in lives, but in innocence lost. Send word to Earth, she ordered. Tell them to prepare for diplomatic delegations. And sir, recommend that our first proposal be a galactic ban on quantum-based weapons research. We need to make sure nothing like this ever happens again. Harrison smiled sadly. Already done, Captain. The Council is drafting the proposal now. We're calling it the Europa Accords, a framework for preventing the development of weapons that threaten the fabric of space-time itself. And if someone violates these accords, then they'll have to face the species that invented the quantum lance. The species that used it once, and then chose to destroy it rather than keep such power. I think that will be deterrent enough. As Harrison's image faded, Sarah returned her attention to the view outside. The debris field was beginning to drift into patterns influenced by Jupiter's gravity, creating strange, beautiful formations in the void. In time, this would become a navigation hazard, a place ships would avoid, a monument of sorts to both humanity's ingenuity and their wisdom in knowing when not to use it again. "Your orders, Captain," Commander Okonjo asked quietly. Sarah straightened her uniform. "Begin preparations for decommissioning, and send word to the fleet. I want every sensor, every camera, every recording device focused on this area. Future generations need to see what happened here. They need to understand both what we're capable of and why we chose to step back from that capability." The price of innovation had been high, but perhaps the wisdom gained had been worth it. The Grand Assembly Hall of Earth's United Government had never hosted so many different species. 3 weeks after the Battle of Jupiter, representatives from 37 spacefaring civilizations crowded the massive chamber, their various environmental suits and adaptation devices creating a low hum of background noise. Sarah Chen stood at the podium, her dress uniform pristine, her posture rigid. Below her, the assembled delegates waited, some anxious, some curious, all intensely focused on humanity's representative. The Quantum Lance's demonstration had rewritten the galaxy's power structure in a matter of hours. Now, everyone wanted to understand the species that had wielded such power and then willingly surrendered it. "The Europa Accords," Sarah began, her voice carrying clearly through the translation systems, "represent more than just an arms limitation treaty. They represent a choice to step back from the precipice of weapons that threaten the very fabric of existence." She gestured to the holographic display behind her, showing the still active quantum disruption field near Jupiter. "What you see is not just destruction. It is a warning, not of humanity's power, but of what any species might do when desperate enough. We created the Quantum Lance because we were given no other choice. Now we choose to ensure that no species ever feels such desperation again." In the front row, the Corexian delegation shifted uncomfortably. Their once mighty empire had been humbled, but Sarah knew their presence here was crucial. Their support of the Accords would show that even the proudest warrior culture could learn from defeat. "The proposed framework includes 3 key elements," she continued. "First, an absolute ban on research into weapons that manipulate fundamental forces or quantum states. Second, the establishment of an independent monitoring agency with representatives from all signatory species. And third, a mutual defense pact that obligates all members to assist any species threatened with extinction." A ripple of surprise moved through the assembly. The third provision had been controversial even among human leadership, but Sarah had insisted on its inclusion. She caught Dr. Wells' eye in the second row. The scientist nodded slightly, understanding the logic. They had built the Quantum Lance because they were alone and desperate. The Defense Pact would ensure no other species ever felt that isolation. "We have seen what lies at the end of the path of escalation," Sarah said, her voice growing more intense. "We have witnessed the cost of pushing scientific boundaries without considering the consequences. The quantum disruption field near Jupiter will remain for centuries, perhaps millennia, as a reminder of what we are capable of, both in terms of destruction and restraint." The archival master of the Centaurian collective raised their sensory appendage, a gesture requesting recognition. Sarah nodded, allowing the question. "Your species possesses the knowledge to create these weapons," the archival master's translated voice echoed through the chamber. "How can we be certain this knowledge will not be used again?" Sarah had expected this question. She touched a control on the podium, and new images appeared behind her, the Prometheus being systematically dismantled, research facilities being decommissioned, data cores being wiped. As we speak, every trace of Quantum Lance technology is being destroyed. Dr. Wells, the weapon's primary architect, has personally overseen the deletion of all research data. The knowledge will remain only in the most basic theoretical form, preserved as a warning rather than a blueprint. She paused, making eye contact with various delegates. "But more importantly, we choose to trust. We trust that together, We can build a galaxy where such weapons are unnecessary, where disputes are resolved through diplomacy rather than destruction, where innovation is directed toward creation rather than devastation. The Corexian High Commander stood next, his massive frame intimidating even in the formal diplomatic setting. My species once believed that supreme military power was the only path to security. We were wrong. We support these accords not from fear, but from understanding. We have seen what lies at the end of the path we walked, and we choose a different way. Sarah nodded in acknowledgement. The Corexian support was crucial. Their influence would sway many other martial cultures. One by one, other delegates began to signal their support. Species that had been bitter enemies found themselves united in the desire to prevent another quantum lance from ever being created. As the session continued, Sarah's thoughts drifted to the Prometheus's crew, now reassigned to various posts throughout the fleet. They had carried the weight of humanity's most terrible weapon, and now they would help build a future where such weapons were unnecessary. Commander Okonjo, standing at the back of the hall, caught her eye and gave a subtle thumbs up. The diplomatic channels were flooded with messages of support. Species that had watched the Battle of Jupiter in horror were now watching humanity lead the way toward ensuring such horror never happened again. The choice before us is simple, Sarah concluded. We can continue the arms race until someone creates something even worse than the quantum lance, or we can join together to ensure that the boundaries of science are pushed in the service of life rather than death. Humanity has made its choice. We await yours. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Within hours, 29 species had signed the preliminary framework. Within days, that number would grow to over 50. The quantum lance had reshaped more than just space near Jupiter. It had reshaped the galaxy's political landscape. The weapon born of humanity's desperation had become the catalyst for something unprecedented. A genuine galactic community, united in the determination to prevent such desperation from ever arising again. As the assembly moved to formal voting procedures, Sarah smiled slightly. They had started this journey trying to save humanity. They might have ended up saving much more than that. 5 years after the Battle of Jupiter, Sarah Chen stood on the observation deck of Harmony Station, watching ships from dozens of species dock and depart. The massive space station, jointly constructed by humans and Corexians, hung in space at the edge of the quantum disruption field, a permanent reminder of both war's cost and peace's promise. The latest readings are fascinating, Dr. Wells said, joining her at the viewport. The scientist had aged well, the weight of responsibility having been replaced by the excitement of new discoveries. The disruption field is actually generating novel quantum states we never thought possible. The research teams are calling it the Jupiter Laboratory. Sarah nodded, watching as a Centaurian science vessel carefully maneuvered through the designated approach corridor, from weapon to wonder. Funny how things change. Speaking of change, Emily gestured to a massive Corexian dreadnought passing by the station. Unlike the warships of 5 years ago, this one bristled with scientific instruments rather than weapons. Did you ever imagine we'd be working alongside them like this? The dreadnought was part of the Combined Sciences Fleet, a multi-species initiative to explore the galaxy's mysteries. The same Corexian drive for excellence that had once made them fearsome warriors now made them invaluable research partners. Admiral Chen, a young ensign, approached, offering the data tablet. The latest reports from the diplomatic corps. Sarah accepted the tablet, still not entirely comfortable with her new rank. After the Europa Accords, she'd been promoted to oversee the implementation of the treaty's scientific cooperation provisions. Thank you, Ensign. And please, just Sarah is fine. The reports were encouraging. The number of signatory species to the Europa Accords had grown to 73. More importantly, the cultural exchange programs were flourishing. Species that had once viewed each other with suspicion now collaborated on projects ranging from terraforming to faster-than-light drive improvements. Message from High Commander Vextal. The station's AI announced. Your presence is requested in Conference Room 1. Sarah smiled. The Caraxian who had supported the Accords in that first assembly had become one of her closest allies. Together, they had helped forge a new understanding between their peoples. In the conference room, Vextal's massive frame occupied a specially designed chair. Around the table sat representatives from 12 other species, the governing board of the Combined Sciences Fleet. Sarah, Vextal rumbled warmly. We've made a decision about the Prometheus site. The remains of humanity's most powerful warship still orbited Jupiter, stripped of all technology, but preserved as a monument. There had been intense debate about its future. The board has approved your proposal, the Centaurian archival master added. The ship will become the core of the new Galactic Peace Museum. Sarah felt a weight lift from her shoulders. She had fought hard for this, a place to preserve the memory of what had happened, not to glorify the weapon, but to ensure its lessons were never forgotten. There's more, Vextal continued. We want you to oversee the project. Your experience, both with the weapon and with bringing species together afterward, makes you uniquely qualified. Sarah looked around the table, seeing not former enemies but colleagues and friends. The quantum lance had been born of humanity's isolation and desperation. Its legacy would be ensuring no species ever felt so alone again. I'd be honored, she said, but I have one condition. The museum needs to tell everyone's story, not just humanity's, not just the Caraxians. Every species that has joined us in building this piece deserves to have their voice heard. Agreed, the archival master's translator chimed. And we believe we have found the perfect location for the main entrance. The holographic display activated, showing a spot where the quantum disruption field had created an unexpected phenomenon, a permanent aurora-like effect that painted space with shifting colors. The light of Jupiter, as the public calls it, Vextal explained, a beautiful reminder that even from destruction, new wonders can emerge. As the meeting continued, Sarah's thoughts drifted to that moment 5 years ago, when she had given the order to fire the quantum lance. They had acted then to save humanity, not knowing they would end up changing the galaxy. The weapon had been built to end a war. Instead, it had helped forge a lasting peace. Later, back at the viewport, Sarah watched a group of children from various species playing in the station's zero-gravity recreation area. They had been born after the Battle of Jupiter, into a galaxy where cooperation was the norm rather than the exception. Amazing, isn't it? Emily joined her again. They'll never know the fear we lived with, the desperation that drove us to build the quantum lance. That's the real victory, Sarah replied softly. Not that we survived, but that we helped create a future where such weapons aren't necessary. The light of Jupiter shimmered in the distance, its colors playing across the viewport. From certain angles, it looked almost like a lens, focusing not energy this time, but hope. Hope for a future where innovation served life rather than death, where different species stood together rather than apart, where the greatest adventures lay not in conquest, but in discovery. Humanity had looked into the abyss of its own potential for destruction and chosen a different path. In doing so, they had helped the galaxy choose a different path as well. The quantum lance had been their darkest creation, but its legacy would be light. And that, Sarah reflected as she watched the children play, was the greatest victory of all.